The Galactic Convergence Games were a spectacle. No, not a spectacle. A celebration. A celebration of the universe's finest, species forged in the fires of war, honed by centuries of survival. And then there was Reed Callan. He was human, a fragile, puny human who barely reached 5.5 feet. His body, though strong for a species of his kind, seemed an insect's size next to the towering, armored forms of his competitors. And yet, here he was, standing in the heart of the arena, waiting for the countdown to begin. The crowds in the stands above were a blur of faces, the roar of their collective voices reverberating through the stadium, a living, breathing organism of its own. Alien creatures of all shapes, sizes, and colors roared with excitement, their various languages blending into a cacophony. Here on this grand stage, only the strongest, the most capable, the most otherworldly had a chance. And then there was Reed. He felt the weight of the world pressing down on him, though it wasn't the physical pressure that unsettled him. It was the stare, the way the galaxy's mightiest beings were looking at him, as if he were an insect under their feet. The smirk on Skoroth's face, the massive, scaled warrior from the Orc clusters, was the least of it. He had seen that before. No, it was the laughter that gnawed at him. The cruel, resonant chuckles drifting from all directions. "Is this a joke?" one of the commentaries mused, as the camera zoomed in on Reed's lean, earthling physique. Laughter echoed in the air as the countdown began. Reed didn't flinch. He didn't let it show. He just stood there, fists clenched at his sides. The blue sky overhead began to darken with the unnatural shades of an approaching storm, clouds swirling like something alive. The arena itself seemed to hold its breath. 5, 4, 3. Reed glanced briefly to his left, where Kareth, the gravity bender from Vithras Prime, was already adjusting the weight displacement boots on his feet. Kareth's glowing violet eyes shifted to Reed, a mocking smile spreading across his alien face. 2, 1. The horn sounded. A sharp, high-pitched note cut through the atmosphere like a blade. The massive steel gates around the arena ground open, and the first of the gauntlet's challenges began. The labyrinth of shattered moons lay before them, fractured, jagged, unstable. Gravity here was a merciless beast, ready to toss them into the vast nothingness of space with the slightest misstep. Each of the competitors had a specific role, a gift of their species' unique abilities to use. Skoroth could crush solid stone with a single swipe, while Kareth's abilities would allow him to control the very air and terrain underfoot. And Reed? Reed had no such tricks. He had nothing but his legs, his determination, and a mind sharp enough to analyze the world around him as it shifted and fractured with every new step. He didn't waste a second. He sprinted forward, faster than anyone could have predicted. His human heart beat at a furious pace, each pulse pounding in his ears. The ground buckled beneath him, pieces of rock flinging through the air as the gravity shifted. His breath was ragged, but his focus was absolute. "Fool," Skoroth muttered, his voice a low growl. But Reed didn't hear it. His focus was on the path ahead. This was his moment. The universe might laugh now, but he wasn't here for them. He was here for himself. The first obstacle loomed, a chasm impossible to cross without the aid of alien enhancements. And yet, Reed ran straight at it, pushing every muscle in his body to the limit. His legs pounding, his feet barely staying ahead of gravity's pull. And he leaped. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The sound of the crowd faded into a blur of static. Reed was airborne. His body twisted mid-flight as he pushed every ounce of human effort into the jump. Then, with a sickening crack, his boots hit the edge of the far side of the chasm. The Gauntlet of the 9 Moons was legendary, an ancient challenge no one had ever completed in less than 3 cycles. Exarcheth, a warrior from the Iravox Dominion, was the reigning champion. His record was myth, etched into the very fabric of the games, a challenge that had humbled empires and broken hearts. The story of Exarcheth was everywhere, from the shattered stones of the ninth moon to the whispered prayers of those who believed his strength would never be surpassed. And so, when Reed Callan, a human, entered the arena, the spectators knew it was impossible. The first part of the gauntlet, the Crucible of Ashes, was meant to kill the weak, crush those not fit for the galaxy's mightiest trials. Its molten rivers and jagged volcanic peaks had turned competitors into nothing but ash. Yet Reed stood at the threshold. No armor, no enhanced limbs, just his grit. Reed's eyes scanned the horizon. Lava churned below in rivers of orange, cracking through the scorched land. A faint scent of sulfur burned his nostrils. The others were already charging ahead, their powers allowing them to leap and soar effortlessly over the molten rivers. But not Reed. He wasn't built like them. He had nothing more than his human strength and will. A voice boomed through the speakers, its synthetic tone cutting through the air. The crucible awaits. Complete the challenge, or be consumed by the flames of eternity. Reed didn't flinch. He started running. Each step he took cracked the ground beneath his feet, but unlike the other competitors, Reed didn't leap. He charged. The heat was unbearable, sweat soaking his clothes, but he ignored it. He focused only on the distance ahead, the next gap to cross, the next obstacle to overcome. He could hear the others now. Zkaroth, the massive Ort cluster warlord, had already crossed to the other side. The Vithrian from Vithras Prime, Kareth, was floating effortlessly above the magma, his glowing body pulsing like a comet. They were laughing. And why wouldn't they? They were perfect, crafted by 1,000 years of evolution to face these challenges. And here was Reed, a human, in their midst. But Reed didn't care. He was running, his heart pounding in his chest. His legs burned with each stride, muscles screaming as if protesting his defiance. He dove through firestorms, dodged molten boulders, and leaped across cracks in the earth, his body pushed to its absolute limit. His breath came in shallow bursts, but his mind was steady, locked on the one goal he knew was impossible: survival. Then, ahead of him, the ground cracked open like a yawning mouth, a deep volcanic chasm that would swallow him whole. He wasn't fast enough to avoid it. He barely had time to react as he found himself falling into the abyss. His stomach lurched. The drop felt endless, a black pit of fire below. But just before he hit the scorching walls of the pit, he reached out, his hand finding an outcrop of jagged rock. He caught himself. Barely. His fingers ached from the force of his grip, but Reed didn't let go. He hauled himself up, every movement desperate. He felt his body tremble under the weight, but his focus never wavered. A voice crackled through his comms. "Human, don't bother. You will fail." Reed's breath was ragged, but there was a defiant smile on his lips as he gritted out his reply. "Not today." And then, with a final surge of human strength, Reed pulled himself up to the edge of the chasm. He was still in the game. For now, the Graveyard of Stars wasn't just another challenge. It was a death sentence. The terrain shifted beneath Reed's boots as he stumbled through the endless black sand dunes, the wind howling in his ears. The moons of the graveyard were ancient, hollowed out by eons of asteroid strikes. Jagged cliffs and shifting valleys surrounded him, as if the universe itself had decided to break everything into pieces just to test the few brave enough to attempt the gauntlet. His body was broken. Every muscle screamed in protest as Reed dragged his foot forward, each step a struggle, but he was still moving. His ribs ached from the fall in the crucible of ashes, his arms were bruised, and his hands, raw from the constant exertion, trembled from exhaustion. But still, he kept moving. The other competitors had already sped ahead, some with unnatural speed, others manipulating gravity or pulling themselves through space with unseen forces. Yet Reed had no such gifts. He only had his endurance and his will. In the distance, the sundering winds howled. The storm was approaching, a roiling vortex of energy and debris that would tear through anything in its path. and it was coming fast. Reed barely had time to adjust his goggles before the wind struck. The sand whipped across his face, 1,000 tiny needles tearing at his skin. His legs wobbled as the wind tried to pull him off balance. But he couldn't stop. If he stopped, the storm would swallow him whole. "Keep moving. Keep moving," Reed whispered to himself through clenched teeth. His breath came in shallow gasps as he pushed forward, one step after another, his legs unsteady but relentless. He thought of Earth, of the days he'd spent running in the desert, training his body to endure the heat, the wind, the desperation. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it had prepared him for this moment. The storm intensified. The sand became a torrential flood, pulling at him like an ocean. He stumbled, falling to his knees, his palms scraping against the ground as the wind threatened to knock him over. But he didn't stay down. His fingers dug into the coarse ground, and he forced himself back up. A faint echo of laughter danced in his mind, the mocking tones of the other competitors. But that only fueled him. He wasn't here for them. He was here to prove something to himself. His foot found solid ground just as the storm reached its peak. The wind howled, a deafening roar that rattled the bones of the world, but Reed found his footing. The sand was almost knee-deep, but he kept going, pushing through, dragging his tired body forward. He didn't know how much further he had to go, but he couldn't stop now. He was too close. His hands were slick with sweat, his body trembling from exhaustion, but the finish line was in sight. He could feel it. And then something caught his eye. Off to the side, a faint shimmer in the air. The Void Stone. The prize of this challenge, the stone said to hold the power to bend time itself, lay just beyond the storm. For a brief moment, Reed hesitated. He wasn't sure if it was real or just a trick of the wind. But as the storm roared louder, he knew he had no choice. With a final, ragged breath, Reed pushed through the last of the sand, his body burning, his mind exhausted, and reached out for the stone. And as his fingers wrapped around it, the storm died. The wind stopped. The world fell silent. The Void Stone was cold against Reed's palm, its surface smooth and dark, like the depths of space itself. For a moment, it felt like everything around him had disappeared. The storm, the gauntlet, the mocking laughter of the galaxy's mightiest competitors. He was alone, holding something that could change everything. But even in that brief stillness, a part of Reed's mind was elsewhere. It was a place far from the graveyard of stars, far from the scorching winds and endless challenges of the gauntlet. It was the red dirt of Earth beneath his feet. His heart beat a little faster. His fingers tightened around the stone. And then, like the opening of a door, memories rushed in. Earth. The sun burned hot above him as young Reed raced across the desert, his legs aching, his feet kicking up a cloud of dust. It wasn't a game. It was training. Every step, every breath, every ounce of energy he poured into his body. His father had told him this day would come. Not just a competition, a trial of humanity itself. The flashback was vivid. His father's rough hand on his shoulder, the sweat on his brow, as they stood beneath a blistering sun. "Your strength is not in your muscles, son," his father had said, voice low, filled with a wisdom Reed couldn't quite understand then. "It's in your will. Your ability to keep going when everything inside you says to stop." Reed could still hear his father's voice, clear as if he were standing beside him now. That was the lesson Reed had carried with him his entire life. The reason he had pushed through unbearable pain in Earth's deserts, why he had fought in impossible conditions, training his mind, his heart, and his body to be stronger than any test the galaxy could throw at him. Back in the gauntlet, Reed's fingers twitched around the Void Stone. The memories blurred and twisted, and his breath came faster. His mind was on fire, memories of Earth fusing with the burning sensation of his body's limits. The storm was behind him, but the gauntlet wasn't over. No, this was only the beginning of the next trial. The stone hummed in his palm, an ancient energy flowing through it. The memories began to pulse, faster, louder, until Reed thought his mind would snap under the weight of it all. A voice echoed inside his skull, a whisper. Focus. He closed his eyes, fighting to ground himself in the present. He had to stay in the moment. He couldn't let the weight of his memories drag him under. He took a deep breath. He could hear the rumbles of the next challenge, echoing from the distance. He wasn't done yet. Not even close. The void stone pulsed again, sharper this time, and Reed opened his eyes. Ahead of him, the labyrinth of mirrors awaited, an impossible maze that shifted and changed, its walls reflective and disorienting, designed to break any who attempted to navigate it. And Reed, despite everything, despite his aching body, despite the memory of his father's words still echoing in his chest, knew one thing. He was going to finish this. He was going to prove them all wrong. The labyrinth of mirrors was more than just a maze. It was a weapon. Every surface in sight gleamed with a reflective sheen, twisting and warping the world around Reed. He couldn't tell if he was facing forward, sideways, or staring into the face of 1,000 reflections of himself. The walls moved, shifting with every step he took, like they were alive. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the faint hum of the mirror's energy, pulling at his mind. Reed's heart was pounding. His legs trembled beneath him from the toll the gauntlet had already taken, and the void stone in his hand felt heavier with each passing moment. He had to move. He had to keep going. But the mirrors weren't just disorienting. They were destructive. Each reflection twisted his thoughts. Each false image of himself gnawed at his mind. He could feel the doubts creeping in. You don't belong here. It was a whisper, soft and chilling, curling through his thoughts like smoke. Reed gritted his teeth, pushing it down. No, not now. He took a step forward. The walls shifted, and for a brief moment, he was staring at himself, standing perfectly still, eyes locked with his own reflection. But this version of himself, this mirrored version, smiled at him. It wasn't a smile of encouragement. It was one of mockery. You'll never make it. You're too weak. Reed shook his head. The voice was growing louder now, like an army of doubts, all yelling at him at once. It felt like the walls were closing in, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. If he stopped, if he allowed the darkness to take root in his mind, he would fail. Focus, he muttered to himself, his voice cracking. His legs were screaming at him, his body begging for relief, but his mind was a storm of images, memories, and self-doubt. Ahead of him, the path forked. Two identical corridors, both seeming to lead nowhere. He had to choose. But how? How could he trust his instincts when the mirrors twisted every path into a mockery of what it should be? How could he trust himself when even his own reflection was telling him to turn back? Reed closed his eyes, shutting out the reflections, the whispers. He focused on the steady rhythm of his breath, the beat of his heart. He didn't need the mirrors to tell him who he was. He didn't need the galaxy's laughter or the weight of centuries of failure to guide him. He only needed what he had learned back on Earth. He reached out with his free hand and pressed it against the wall of mirrors, feeling the cold, smooth surface beneath his fingers. And then, with a deep breath, he pushed forward. The mirrors shifted again, but this time, Reed didn't flinch. He didn't turn back. He stepped through the illusion, stepping beyond the reflection of the human he used to be. He knew now, he wasn't just a human. He was something more than their expectations, more than their limitations. As he continued to move forward, the reflections began to change. The twisting corridors smoothed out. The world around him began to settle. And ahead of him, through the shimmering glass, he saw the next challenge. He was still standing. He was still going. And he was ready. Reed's breath was ragged, his lungs burning with every intake of air as he crossed the threshold into the wellspring of echoes, the final challenge of the gauntlet. The atmosphere here was different, thick with an unnatural weight, the air heavy and pressing against him as if the very world was holding its breath. Above, the sky was a swirling mass of colors, purples, blues, and blacks, a galaxy of light that seemed to bend and fold in impossible ways. The ground beneath his feet was smooth, like polished stone, but it gave way in places, forming cracks that seemed to stretch into infinity. The sound of the cracks was deafening, a high-pitched hum that vibrated through the soles of his boots, seeping into his bones. He had made it this far, this far. Reed couldn't help but pause for a moment, his eyes scanning the strange landscape. He had been tested in ways no human ever should have been, his body and mind pushed to their limits. But now, standing in the heart of the wellspring, with the knowledge that only one last trial stood between him and the final victory, he felt something else, something he couldn't quite name. It was certainty. As if summoned by his thoughts, a figure appeared before him, stepping out from the shadows of the swirling light. Exarcheth, the Ort Cluster warlord, the undefeated champion, the one who had never failed, the one whose record had haunted every competitor who came before Reed. Exarcheth's massive form towered over him, his eyes glowing a fierce, molten yellow. His armor was dented and scarred from countless battles, the remnants of past victories. His smile was one of pure disdain. "You should not have come here, human." Exarcheth's voice rumbled, low and threatening. "This is the final trial, and you are not worthy of victory." Reed didn't flinch. The words, the taunting, none of it mattered anymore. He had come too far, faced too many trials, to let this be his end. "I'm here to finish this," Reed said, his voice steady, even though his body felt like it was about to collapse under the weight of exhaustion. "And I'm not turning back." Exarcheth chuckled darkly, raising a massive hand toward the sky. The ground beneath them rumbled, and the atmosphere seemed to warp, the colors in the sky twisting into something darker, colder. The very air grew still, suffocating, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. "Then we shall see," Exarcheth said, stepping forward, his enormous form moving with terrifying speed. The battle began instantly. Exarcheth's fist shot forward like a meteor, aimed straight for Reed's chest. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. Reed dove to the side, barely avoiding the crushing blow, his heart pounding in his ears. He couldn't rely on speed or strength. He couldn't match the Ort warlord in raw power. But he had something else. Instinct, focus, the will to survive. Reed rolled to his feet, pain lancing through his side from the blows he had taken earlier. He had to keep moving, keep thinking, keep finding a way. His eyes flicked to the shimmering cracks in the ground, the cracks that seemed to pulse with energy. He couldn't stop. Not now. He was so close. Exarcheth swung again, this time aiming low. Reed ducked, then surged forward with a speed and agility that caught even the warlord off guard. With a sharp twist, Reed's hand grabbed a jagged piece of rock from the ground and swung it upward, catching Exarcheth off balance. The warlord staggered, giving Reed a split second to push forward, to drive the fight with everything he had left. The final test wasn't just about strength. It was about heart. And Reed's heart, it was unbreakable. The fight with Exarcheth was nothing like Reed had ever experienced. The Ort warlord's sheer power was overwhelming, his every strike sending shockwaves through the air. The ground shook under the force of his blows, and Reed had to move with an almost animal instinct to avoid being crushed under the weight of his enemy's fury. The battle was raw, primal, and unrelenting. Reed's body ached, the pain from earlier trials mixing with the brutal impact of Exarcheth's attacks. His ribs were on fire, his muscles felt like they were made of molten stone. But he kept fighting. The human will, the thing that had driven him from Earth to this alien battlefield, was stronger than the physical pain. It was the last thing he had left. Exarcheth swung a fist that sent Reed sprawling to the ground. His vision blurred from the force of the hit, and for a moment, he thought the world might end right then, under the weight of a godlike warrior. But he couldn't give in. He couldn't fall here. Reed gasped, pushing himself up with everything he had. His hands scraped against the rough stone ground, the feeling of it digging into his skin. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum, and he could feel the tremors of his body's exhaustion. But the fire of defiance was still there. Exarcheth loomed over him, ready to strike again, his monstrous arm raised high. But this time, Reed was ready. With a burst of adrenaline, he rolled forward, sliding between Exarcheth's legs. He could hear the warlord's roar of frustration as the blow missed by inches, the sound echoing off the walls of the wellspring of echoes. Reed didn't waste time. He dove forward, using the momentum to push himself up. His legs burned, but he ignored it. He reached out with his hands, grabbing a jagged shard of rock from the ground. It was crude, but it didn't matter. It was all he had. With a swift, desperate motion, Reed lunged at Exarcheth's side, driving the sharp edge of the rock into the gap in the warlord's armor. Exarcheth howled in pain, staggering back, but Reed didn't stop. He pressed the attack, his body moving on pure instinct now, fueled by the need to survive. The warlord's expression twisted into a snarl, and he retaliated with a furious swipe, knocking Reed back once again. Reed hit the ground hard, his vision flashing as stars danced in his eyes. But he didn't lose focus. He couldn't. He saw the void stone glowing in his hand, its pulse steady and rhythmic. It was a reminder of everything he had already overcome. It was the key to his victory. With one last push, Reed rose to his feet, the stone humming with energy. The ground trembled beneath him as he faced Exarcheth, who was breathing heavily, his strength faltering just slightly. The Ort warlord charged, but this time Reed was ready. He sprinted forward, faster than he had ever moved, using the stone's energy to propel himself. As Exarcheth's fist came down, Reed dodged, twisting around the warlord with inhuman speed. And then, with a final desperate cry, Reed lunged. The battle was over. The world seemed to hold its breath. Reed stood over Exarcheth's fallen form, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his forehead as the warlord's massive body lay crumpled before him. The Ort champion's once glowing eyes were dim, his armor cracked, his strength spent. The battle was over. The gauntlet had been conquered. For a long moment, Reed couldn't move. His body trembled with exhaustion, his mind spinning from the intensity of the fight. He had never faced a challenge like this before, and now that it was over, the weight of it all crashed down on him. He had done it. He had done it. The void stone still pulsed in his hand, glowing with an eerie light that seemed to resonate with the very air around him. It had been the key to his survival, the force that had given him the edge when all else seemed lost. But now, standing in the silence of the wellspring, Reed didn't feel invincible. He felt human, tired, alive. A soft hum filled the air, and the ground beneath his feet trembled again, this time with a different energy, a new presence. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a being unlike any Reed had seen before, tall, cloaked in flowing robes that shimmered like liquid starlight. Their face was hidden beneath a hood, but their eyes gleamed with an otherworldly wisdom. "You are the first," the figure said, their voice a melodic hum, soft yet powerful. "The first human to survive the gauntlet, the first to break the records of the galaxy's mightiest warriors." Reed's chest tightened. "I didn't break any records. I just kept going." The figure's eyes seemed to shine brighter at his words. "And that is why you are here. It is not your strength, nor your power, that makes you special. It is your will, your unbreakable resolve." Reed could hardly catch his breath. What does that mean? What happens now? The figure took a step closer, and the air seemed to hum with energy. "What happens now is you have a choice, human. You have earned the right to leave this place, to return to your world, and live the life you choose. You are no longer bound by the expectations of the galaxy. You have proven that humanity is something more than what others believed. Reed looked down at the void stone in his hand. It had given him the strength to survive, but it was never what had carried him to this point. He turned his gaze back to the figure, his voice steady. I choose to go back. To Earth. To show everyone what we're capable of. The figure smiled, though the expression was hidden beneath the cloak. Then go. Your journey is yours to shape. The universe will remember the name of the human who stood where gods have fallen. With a final, gentle wave of their hand, the figure disappeared, leaving Reed alone in the stillness. The gauntlet was over. Reed took one last breath, feeling the weight of the void stone lift from his hand. Its purpose fulfilled. He was no longer a competitor in a cosmic game. He was simply a human who had won, and the universe would never forget it.